back, everyone, to our panel discussion, and welcome to the speakers. I'm getting a bit of background from someone. Mind muting yourselves just while you're not speaking. So hopefully she cut out the background noise. Sounds good. Great. Thank you all of you so much for joining me. I'll give a quick introduction to the panel and then we'll dive into today's questions. So the topic of this panel, as you'll have all seen from the agenda, is building a healthy antinatalist community. And there are some key questions embedded into the topics of this panel. What would a healthy antinatalist community look like? Like, how do we practically get there? And answering these questions is putting them into practice. However, as anyone who's been involved in communities revolving around a moral or social issue, this is much easier said than done. Having a healthy antinatalist community is in all of our interests, both in terms of our own engagement with the community, but also its capacity to be able to do things. And that's why we view nurturing a healthy community as a top priority for antinatalist advocacy, even though it will be no easy thing. Fortunately, there are many people who wish to see the same thing come to fruition, and we've convened a panel of them here today. So we've got three interesting and experienced people in the antinatalist community and other communities as well. And we're hoping that you can shed some light on how we can build the healthier antinatalist community that we would all like to see. So I'll give a quick introduction to all three of our panelists. So first, on the right of my screen, Amanda Sukenick is an American sculptor and a video artist who's been producing antinatalist content since 2010. She created the 2016 movie, The EFIList, and is the host of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, which is now at 80 episodes, unless one has come out recently, or is it still at 80? Thereabouts.
On the way.
On the way. More recently, she's collaborated heavily with antinatalist philosopher Matti Häyry, who was obviously on our conference yesterday. And together they've published the paper Imposing a Lifestyle, a New Argument for Antinatalism, and they have an upcoming book, Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreated Self-Corruption. Below me on the screen, we're joined by Ash Wickety. Ash is an antinatalist activist and organizer, also from the States. Ash has done extensive work with Stop Having Kids, including organizing in-person street outreach. And she's also an experienced and dedicated animal rights activist in the States and was the co-host of the former MNintersectional Podcast. So to make sure I pronounce the title correctly, Ash. It was
MNintersectional.
MNintersectional. Sounds good. And then lastly, on the bottom right of my screen is Shweta Ramkumar, joining us from Melbourne, Australia. Shweta is a child-free advocate who's been involved in organising and maintaining both online and in-person child-free communities. She's travelled across the globe, working in a variety of industries, and is currently a business entrepreneur. Shweta has also experienced breaking free from disempowering cultural conformity through choosing a child-free lifestyle whilst being a member of the South Asian diaspora. So thank you very much for joining us, Shweta. And I understand that you have to leave at 8:40 to go, 8:40 UK time. It's obviously much different time zone in Australia. So we'll make sure to get to your questions before then. So my first question, actually, before we get to those questions, just a quick note on format for the audience. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to ask a question and then direct it to someone first to give their first comments, then obviously open it to the floor. But this first one is for all three of you. And that is, what are the key characteristics of a healthy community and why should we want one? So Amanda, as you're first up on my screen, would you like to go first?
I would love to. So first off, I want to say thank you so much, John, and a hello to Ash. Lovely to see you, and a hello to Shweta. It's love to finally meet you. So in attempting to answer this question and in an attempt to sort of diagnose and answer this broader question of, how do we build a broader antinatalist community, I prepared a little bit of what I believe to sort of be a statement on the state of where we are in antinatalism currently. It's a little bit of a spiel, but I'll go quickly and then hand it off to my lovely co-panelists. So building a healthy antinatalist community, my diagnosis, sadly, regrettably, is that I think we are a very long way away from an antinatalist community that is ready to receive a clean bill of health. I think we lack focus. I think we're incredibly adversarial with one another. We can't agree on anything, and we lack goals. That's not to say that building a healthy antinatalist community is impossible, and that's not to say that there haven't been some extremely encouraging recent developments. This conference, which has nurtured so much positive conversation on so many of really the most challenging and controversial aspects of antinatalism today, is a real step in the right direction. Communication is, I think, a key part of the prescription for curing what ails antinatalism. But regardless, I think we're going to have to apply a very great deal of determination and patience if a healthy antinatalist community is in fact what we want to create. So listen, we have real issues. We have huge disagreements. In fact, I don't think as a community we can agree on much of anything. What I believe might be evidence of health within the community is likely entirely different than what my fellow panelists may believe, let alone what the constituent members of our fine audience might believe. Some of us think that in addition to being a philosophical movement, antinatalism should be an organized social movement as well. Others are extremely opposed to that concept, the concept of antinatalist activism in any way, shape, or form. Some of us are extinctionists. Some of us are sentient extinctionists, even, or reverse biocentric extinctionists. Others want nothing to do with any of that and don't even think that those subjects should be talked about at all. Some of us want to genetically engineer humans in the hopes that procreation could be turned ethical. Others don't think that that's even possible and are concerned that there might be extra ethical concerns, along the way for that plan as well. Some of us firmly believe that animals and animal interventionism is part of antinatalism. Others firmly do not. There are really radical forms of antinatalism and not so radical forms of antinatalism, and you have very radical adjacent, maybe or not, ideas connected to antinatalism, like promortalism, which I think contemporary antinatalism has done very little to fully contend with, quite frankly. You have antinatalism, vehement, EFILism, childfree, anti-AI natalism, and activism, maybe sort of a little bit, all competing with one another. And these are huge divides with very little historical precedent so far of these constituent elements being able to do anything other than war against each other and distance themselves from one another. No hope of working towards goals or even agreeing that there should be goals in the first place. Compounding that, we have a very serious illness in the form of an overarching fear problem that has plagued contemporary antinatalism since the very beginning, and I believe will continue to cripple us for a long time to come. People are afraid to be antinatalists. People are afraid to speak about antinatalism, and our attrition and recidivism rates, as far as people leaving the community at least, are very, very high. The social cost of antinatalism is not a currency people can afford to invest in. So we have real problems. And in my opinion, these are problems that must be addressed and that we must find a way of ameliorating, because antinatalism as both a philosophy and as a social movement have very important jobs to do. And that is doing what's best to serve the unborn, preventing lives. And until we can put the unborn first over whatever discomforts we may have with one another, I don't believe we can ever truly be a healthy antinatalist community. And I pass it on to the next speaker.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And that definitely has answered a fair few of my questions that I had here. Ash, I've got you next on my screen. Would you like to talk about what are the key characteristics of a healthy community and why we should strive for it?
I definitely agree with a lot of what Amanda said, and I understand that our backgrounds are a little different. I do a lot of the in-person, or trying to build the in-person community. I think a lot of it comes down to communication and being willing to set our differences aside and just kind of focusing on the common goal. And, if we can even agree on a common goal, for me, that would be educating the public more about antinatalism and normalizing it more. If it becomes more commonly spoken about, I think people will feel a lot more comfortable coming forward talking about it. I admittedly, before I got involved in this kind of activism, despite having years experience of doing street activism for animal rights, I was scared. I thought people were going to react really harshly, and I was nervous to get out there. And I will say my experience has been pretty overwhelmingly positive, even more so than a lot of the animal rights issues that I've stood out on the street and talked to people about. And so I think that the Stop Having Kids group that I organized for, we have a YouTube channel, and that shows a lot of our on the street outreach. And some of that is the more like out there rare occurrences, because that's what gets, viewers' attention and gets people talking. But especially in my experience here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the US, people seem really ready to have these conversations. And I think just communicating, focusing on a common goal, and putting differences aside and not letting, infighting totally destroy our movement if we want to make this more of a mainstream idea.
Great. Thanks, Ash. And Shweta, what are your thoughts on the characteristics of a healthy community and how we can get there?
So Amanda and Ash have covered the antinatalist side of things. I'm just going to give my spin on what I have experienced, which is in the childfree space. So so I have been involved in not just founding, but also sort of supporting a lot of the global communities. Now, I suppose when it comes to being childfree, in a way, it's probably a little bit easier but then again, it's hard to tell. So because being childfree in isolation is not as extreme as, or is not seen as being as extreme as being antinatalist. So usually when I approach childfree people, the most common thing that they say to me is that they feel very isolated. They feel like they don't have anyone whom they can relate to, because all of their friends are having kids, and as a result, they have grown apart and their lives have changed, their identities have changed. So they look for avenues where they can actually really be themselves, and also places where they can, share things that they cannot openly share with their parent friends. And also, if it's an in-person situation, if they can sort of, network, socialize, and sort of get together from time to time. And that has really been the purpose of what I have contributed in this space. So to really give these people who feel like they're just on their own in terms of their choice, feeling that they're not on their own, and they feel supported and they feel welcomed in the group. So the groups that I have been involved in, they are very diverse and very varied. So even though the broad umbrella is people without children, some of them have included people who were not able to biologically have children for whatever reason, and also some of them, not all, have because they're one of the partners, they have children, so those are included. But that particular group is only for people to, well, not just for that, predominantly for people to really get host events, get together, and do things like that. And through that group, I think we've all come together very nicely, and we've sort of formed like a family, like a tribe, and it's only for women. So it's just a local group of where I live. So here where I live, 1 in 3 people are child-free. So it's very common here to be child-free, and you don't really get a lot of grief for that. So and the group has grown a lot since it came. So it was just started off with 20 of us in 2021, and then now it's about almost 1,000. So and it's just everyone in the same city and or the same state. And yeah, so we sort of get together from time to time, and like every week there's some event or other. It's up to you whether you can go or not. And also, in the group itself, because they're Facebook groups, the admins will generally put out a question every single week. Things like what was a small win that you had this week. So it's not just being about about being child-free. Obviously, you can, if you're experiencing grief or isolation for being child-free, you can obviously talk about that. But also, to provide that support and to provide that real sense of unity and community. There are questions that are posed every week that, celebrate your small wins. What was a highlight of the week, and what was one of the challenges of this week. And now, for example, I post in that group every Wednesday. It could be, a podcast that I have interviewed for, or I might post something quite funny, that's related to being child-free. I might even ask a question. What do you guys think of this? So I do this once a week, but any member can really do that. And some other groups, now this particular group is, it's one of those groups where you cannot discuss antinatalism. And rightly so, because there are people in this group who have not been able to have children for whatever reason. But there are other groups that are more not just within where I live, but also like the broader Australian communities, where they do give this option, where you can speak about antinatalism and where you can have the discussion much more broadly. So yeah, all of these have really served the purpose of making people feel less alone and more connected and united. So I'm really pleased with how far it has come since when it started, and it's only uphill from here, I guess.
Thanks, Shweta. And I guess I hadn't been considering until you went through like the different ways that people came to the child-free community. I guess I hadn't been considering the diversity within the child-free community, the diversity of experience and perspective. And I was going to wonder, what lessons can we learn from the child-free community? If we can come back to you, Shweta, about how we can try and resolve conflict within the antinatalist community.
Sorry, am I still answering this question?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was going to say yes. Yeah. If there are any lessons that we can learn in terms of like resolving conflict.
I mean, look, there have been conflicts in our group also, from time to time. I guess for really having really clear guidelines of how much of something negative can we talk about in these groups? Because what can happen is when you are child-free, or even when you're antinatalist, you can feel, and I think it's even worse if you're an antinatalist, because you are, probably the only one in your group of child-free people who is antinatalist, or you might be one of 5 or 6. So if you sort of put your views forward, some people might get upset or offended by it, but that seems to be for anything and everything nowadays anyway. I guess for having guidelines about how much of negativity you can post in a group, I guess, because that really what starts off the process of conflict to begin with. And people, they tend to disagree, and then one thing or the other happens, and the admin has to switch off the comments and suspend it. It's happened to me. Be the first one to admit where I've done that. And obviously, in one of the groups, one of the child-free groups, I'm actually the admin. So I have the power to actually, boot people, block people if I choose to. It's never got to that point, though. It's never been an issue. I guess for me, the other bit of conflict that I have experienced is I was actually part of another child-free group, which I had to leave, in about 3 or 4 months' time, because that was one of those groups where I felt that it was very, very pandering and pleasing towards parents. So you couldn't say anything negative about children. You couldn't say anything negative about parents. So those are the groups that, I just absolutely do not, vibe or resonate with that. But there has to be a healthy balance. So, like the groups that I'm a part of, yes, you can talk about, the challenges that you face as a child-free person in a very pro-natalist world. But some people just take it too far, and they'll post about 5 or 6 things they'll post on in one day, and in which case the groups that I'm the admin of, I can just boot them. So I can just say we can't do that. And I think communicating in a healthy way without really, I guess, polarizing or dividing people is very important. That the group that I left was very good at doing that. They would just divide people who did not like children or did not respect parents. They would just divide them with the ones who were of the former group, who really respected parents, who really loved kids. They would just look down on the others who don't feel that way. And just having very clear guidelines from the get-go about what the group is about and what will be welcomed and tolerated and what will not be. So having and enforcing those boundaries is really, really important. And also giving consequences to people who don't adhere to that can really go a long way. So that's what I would say can be the basis really of identifying and managing conflict in these groups. Sure.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I think especially relevant as a lot of antinatalism, well, I couldn't put a percentage on it, but I'd probably say over 99% does exist online. But I did have a question here for you, Ash, and then obviously to open it to the floor as well, around like how, well, maybe this is a bit presumptuous. I'm framing it in a leading way. I was going to say, like, how can we have more of an in-person element? I think I might make it broad and say, should we have more of an in-person element to the antinatalist community? And if so, how can we get there?
I think having more of an in-person presence would definitely be helpful in normalizing antinatalism and getting the word out about it. And I think a lot of that does start online. I'm grateful that we have so many online communities where we can start this. My local Stop Having Kids group, we have a Facebook group where we can bounce ideas off of each other, plan events, things like that. And we've done dine outs, just getting together at a local vegan spot and getting to know each other. And a lot of people who are antinatalists, they have been keeping these feelings inside. Maybe they've chatted about it online, but they haven't had the opportunity to have these discussions in person. And I know how exciting it is to meet other, vegans or antinatalists and being able to kind of just be really honest about your feelings and also learn new things. Like Amanda had mentioned all these different forms of antinatalism. So many don't even know that those exist. I don't even personally know the details about a lot of them. So it's cool to meet in person and be able to have more in-depth discussions without the screen. And I think like getting together to volunteer, to work toward a common goal. I mean, we've gone out and pulled buckthorn. It's an invasive plant that was brought here. And it helps, other animals and the environment. So just working together and I think doing projects and like seeing that you completed something or that you improved conditions for somebody else is a really good feeling and it's really unifying. And I think also building these friendships shows people that they have support. So what I like to do is if somebody's interested in maybe doing street outreach, but they're not comfortable speaking, I will tell them, hey, come out, hold a sign. If you get in a situation where someone's asking you something, I'll be alert. You can flag me down. You can flag whoever else down who is very comfortable speaking. And that pressure is taken off of them and they can just kind of observe and see how certain things are answered till they build up that own level of comfort within themselves. And even so, just showing that they have that support. Let's say they get in a conversation, but they kind of get stuck on something or, there's other people that they can call in to help them until they get far more comfortable doing that on their own. So I guess starting online, moving it in person, maybe not focusing on jumping into antinatalist outreach or tabling or things like that, but building that foundation and that trust and that confidence so that you can start having conversations about antinatalism with, everyday people on the street.
Great. Thanks, Ash. And Amanda, Shweta, any more thoughts on having more of an in-person element to the antinatalist community?
Yeah, I mean, talk about positive developments. I mean, I think Stop Having Kids. I mean, maybe this sort of began really with Vehement. I mean, Vehement, was doing the in-person booths and stuff for a long, long time. But I think, with and the Church of Euthanasia. But I mean, particularly Stop Having Kids has really done so much to bring antinatalism back out into the actual real world, and take it away from the screen. And there's been, I think it's tremendous, like what they've been able to accomplish with the billboards and the signs, and also the inspiration that it's had on, people like Sumit, in India, that there's sort of little chapters popping up all over the world that are really influenced by Stop Having Kids. So it's clearly resonated with people in a big way. I want to see as much of that happen as possible. I want there to be a healthy online antinatalist community, and I want there to be a healthy offline antinatalist community. I've tried to contribute to this in my own ways by having like film screenings and things like that. It's not really my wheelhouse, but yeah, I want to see as much of that happen as possible. I don't think that it's going to fix some of the big problems that the community has. I mean, maybe maybe I'm a little bit of a pessimist. I don't know, but I just am a little bit not sure if it's exactly what's going to cure a lot of the issues. And I think part of why I'm a little bit skeptical is that I've just seen so much evidence over the years of the fear problem. And I think as antinatalism becomes a more widely known concept in the world, as media attention grows, which I mean, just in this last year, it's grown significantly. I think the stakes are going to be higher for people to be, to create identities, known identities around this subject. But look, I mean, this in-person antinatalism has come a tremendously long way. I mean, if I think back to 2011, there was a very well-known YouTuber that was not an antinatalist, but very involved in these conversations. His name was Conference Report, or Fred. And he actually did a whole video series at one point. I think he even had a website called Life Sucks or something like that. No relation to Life Sucks, the artist, where he would, like wear like a pig mask and like have signs out on the street saying life sucks, because he was mocking antinatalists for not ever, he didn't think antinatalists would ever get to the point where they would have the courage to do something like this. So he was sort of mocking, antinatalists, and there was a belief that if you did something like this, if there were billboards, antinatalists would be shot left and right in the streets. I mean, none of that's come to pass, thankfully. So yeah, so I think it's a great thing. I hope it continues, but I just am I'm a little cautious, and I wonder as to the growth, just where, if there's a stopping point. Yeah, all I can do is say that I will be watching like a hawk every movement in the development of in-person antinatalism, and I hope that it's successful.
Thanks, Amanda. Shweta, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, compared to most people in this panel, I am relatively new to the antinatalist space. I did not even know that it existed. Now, let's take back to when I was a child, and since the second I was born, I knew that I didn't want children. But this is the question I always used to wonder at the back of my head, and also because I think I came from India, which is overpopulated and has its own share of problems. I always used to wonder that, why are people having biological children when there are so many orphans and who are just waiting to be adopted? So even though I didn't know that there was such a term called antinatalism, I think from a young age I was probably one, but only in 2020 when I learned more about what antinatalism was. And this was because a lot of people, they saw my work and they exposed me to it, and I was like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. I guess for me, a lot of people I know in the child-free community have expressed interest in, can we start a Stop Having Kids chapter over here? And, I'm completely on board with that. Now, for me personally, that is something that I'm very time pressed. I have a lot of other priorities now, and I absolutely cannot commit to creating another community and, making sure because it's a lot of work. And also, I think, it can really be, where I think it can be problematic is that it can really be seen as you're almost sort of trying to, yes, the whole purpose is to raise awareness, yes, about what antinatalism is and why it should be normalized. But also when you're sort of telling people that, to join or get more curious, it can be really seen as you're sort of trying to build a cult, or, you can really, you're sort of trying to push our agenda down on them. That's where I think we can run into a little bit of a problem in this situation. So even though, I mean, if I was randomly walking around on the street and I saw a sign like that, because it resonates with me, I would definitely go and inquire about what this is all about and sort of join in. But I think even if you draw the analogy with our free spaces, we did sort of meet online first, and then it sort of diverged in person. And that, I think, setting that foundation is very important, that people are on the same page and they're all sort of well aligned, and then you sort of do as an event. Now, look, if people in my circle, my child-free circle, if they do want to start like a Stop Having Kids chapter locally, 100%. I would, I'll start with, I would probably support starting with like the sort of get-togethers that Ash was mentioning, but to really sort of, and then they can all sort of pitch in their ideas, how we can spread the message on a global level, on a broader level in our local communities and things like that. So yeah, it should be done in such a way that we're not being perceived as some activists who are really wanting to have our own agenda that way. It's mainly to raise awareness, but I guess that's where the work really needs to be done. How to do it in a way where the focus really is on raising awareness, and it's not really to judge people for their choices and think, guilt tripping, fear mongering. I think that's where a lot of the work would need to be done.
May I add something to that really briefly? I first of all, I just want to say, I'm so happy that we have a representative from the child-free community here with us on the panel. Unfortunately, child-free and antinatalism are very heavy territorialized against each other often, not always. Like Lenora, with child-free girls, there's been some really good movement towards combining the two over the last couple of years. But for the most part, the territorialization has been pretty extreme, between the two groups. They kind of often want nothing to do with each other. And part of the resulting thing from that is that there's been this tremendous gender divide in antinatalism, where there's antinatalism is for men and child-free is for women. And I just think that is so toxic to what both sides are trying to build. And so especially if there's any kind of movement towards worrying about a cultish appearance or anything. I don't know, any amount of being able to voice these things from a male perspective, from a female perspective, from a collective of both genders and all genders, not just male and female identifying people. That's a huge step in the right direction of normalizing this thing. But unfortunately, that's a huge deterritorializing antinatalism and child-free is tremendously controversial because people want them kept separate. And I just think that's a huge mistake. I don't think it serves the unborn at all, really. I think all it does is serve really useless divides and ego. And yeah, so I think that would be a great push in the right direction.
Oh, definitely. And that is something that I did notice as well, because I do remember listening to a child-free podcast where they said that they felt that the child-free spaces were mostly dominated by women. And then when I came into antinatalism, I saw quite the opposite. So again, just from my own anecdotal experience. And I found that very, very strange. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ash. Sorry, I think you're just coming off mute. Oh, great. Shweta, I'm worried about your... not worried, wary of your time. So now you do have to head off to work. So one thing that I was going to ask, you did talk a bit about people coming into, obviously growing the child-free community down in Melbourne. So I was wondering about how, and again, this might already been covered by various topics that we discussed earlier, but how can the antinatalist community ensure that new members find it easy to integrate and then they remain within the community? Because I think, as Amanda, you mentioned, there's a very high turnover rate within the antinatalist community, unfortunately. So I guess, from your experience with the child-free community, Shweta, and just in general, what can we do to make sure that people feel welcome and they want to stick around?
I can sort of draw an analogy of how the group that I am a part of, where it's just women who don't have children. So when new members join and someone, one of the admins, I'm not one of them, I'm not one of the admins in the group, and they will sort of send out a generic message. So they'll keep track of who the new members are, and they will send out a generic message of just DM them and ask, just make them feel welcome. I'm open to asking any questions, and also, for a lot of people, just meeting in person, and I think this has worsened after COVID because people now really hesitate to interact with each other in person, and they have a lot of anxieties and fears. And and I think for the person who actually does this welcome in our group, she was one of them too. When during our very first meetup, she experienced a lot of fear and anxiety, and then she could sort of share her experience with the new members on how they can sort of be best prepared, and also just reiterate the fact that this is a welcoming, supportive community, and as long as you meet these two, you identify as a woman, no matter what your gender is. You can be non-binary, you can be transgender, or anything like that, and whatever your life choices are. We never talk about very extreme things like politics and religion and things like that. And even in this particular group, we leave out antinatalism because the purpose of the group is completely different. So, and I think that is what having that principle where someone from the admin is in charge of actually making the new members feel welcome, and even schedule a call with the new members and ask them how they feel about the group, just answering any questions, and just putting their mind at ease when they do actually meet in person. So that can be a very good strategy to sort of move forward. And I guess for when it comes to antinatalism, the question that I really have is that because like Amanda mentioned, there is an intersectionality between childfree and antinatalism, but also there is that divide and toxicity, because there are a lot of people who are parents or who are also antinatalists. So I suppose, where do you draw the line? Like, would you, in a community that's like that, and is the purpose really to bring like-minded people together, or is it to raise awareness and really spread the message that what bringing more humans does to the world? So having that clarity of which direction it's going in. Like for me, in the groups that I'm a part of, each group has a different purpose and a different meaning. So one is really the broader group where you can obviously share your grievances, your problems, and whatever else. And the other group is where it's for in-person events and for women, fortunately, unfortunately, and things like what you can do, and just day-to-day problems that you might experience. So yeah, so I guess having those clear guidelines and boundaries, and I think when new members join in, you have to actually also be very transparent, let people know what this is going to be about, and what we don't want and what we do want. So just having just from the get-go, just make it very make it very obvious and clear of what the expectations are. And I think just from a very from the early stages, just make them feel supported and welcome, so that the nerves and anxiety sort of reduce in the future.
Ash, Amanda, anything to add?
Not much to add. She said it well. Just making people feel included, making them feel welcome, making them feel heard. Find out maybe somebody's strengths and how they can apply that to whatever your goal is. And yeah, that's about it.
I think those are all excellent ideas towards a path forward of trying to make people feel more welcome. I think it's a little harder with antinatalism, because some of the, I think we should be trying to find a version of this thing that speaks to the most people, that people can find agreeable enough to actually go, you know what, I'm not going to procreate. That probably would be best. The problem is that some of the more extreme forms of antinatalism are able to address different forms of suffering that less extreme versions do. So it's like, if we find a less extreme version of antinatalism that might speak to more people, are we also saying we're not going to be able to do anything about wild animal suffering or factory farming? Or does it mean that we have to cut veganism out? Does it mean that we have to not talk about extinction? Does it mean that we AI antinatalism? All of these different forms of suffering may never be addressed if antinatalism becomes smaller and more consumable. And I want antinatalism to be as consumable as possible, because I want to prevent lives and I want to do well by the unborn. But I also, my antinatalism covers a lot of forms of unborn creatures. And so, and I don't think that it's healthy to ignore or shove off, some of the more difficult subjects. I think that's exactly I mean, I think part of the incredible strength of this conference is that it's faced those subjects. It's faced some of the most controversial and challenging subjects within antinatalism. So, needless to say, I'm a little bit torn. You know, I think that we as individual activists, we need to move forward with a principle of kindness and compassion, understanding as best that we possibly can. You know, Mati and I write about that in our paper, Imposing a Lifestyle, and in our upcoming book. But it's difficult because, again, I think that, again, trying to make this thing as consumable as possible may also come with a sacrifice to the full range of good that this philosophy actually is capable of achieving.
Thanks, Amanda. And I've just got one question here, and Shweta, I know you have to go, so I'm going to quickly ask you this one first. Again, this is something we may have already covered, but what would you say if there was one key lesson that we could learn from another community? What would it be?
Look, there is no perfect community. I can say that from the child-free space and everything that I've been involved in. And this is just me personally. Now, for me, I am always an advocate of making communities smaller, intentional, and well-aligned. So I'm just going to give you an example of a business group that I'm a part of. So the business group literally has 60 people. That's it. And it is one of the most positive, one of the most supportive communities. Yes, obviously, to get to be a part of the group, you have to pay and everything like that. But still, that is in that group. It's you can really see that level of support, that level of positivity in that group. Whereas, in all of the other child-free communities that I have been a part of, there's just there are ups and downs. Like there are things that there's no real. Sometimes groups are just created for the heck of it, and so that people just feel less alone. And they'll ask new members. They'll be required to ask answer some questions, and then they let in or whatever. And then and the problem is when the bigger a group becomes, it's harder to manage. You can't possibly make every single person feel welcome if you're having a group of 20,000 people. That's just not going to happen. So I guess the number of groups is one thing, but also being intentional and clear about what the group is going to be about. And and I think smaller groups, or even like a medium-sized group where there is cohesion and intimacy, that's really important, because you don't want to be in a group where you're just there and all you're doing is just reading other people's posts and you're posting, and it just is a bit of a negative environment in that situation. So personally, I'm an advocate of having smaller groups, minimalist groups, and really intentional groups which is manageable, where there is true unity and cohesion and intimacy is what. But I am aware that it's not for everybody. But that this is just my principle. That anything that's small and manageable is really the way to go.
Great, and thank you so much, Shweta, for joining us today. Any final words before you go?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and yes, I will look forward to seeing the recording now.
Great. Nice meeting you, Shweta.
Take care. Yeah, bye-bye.
Great. So I'll fire that question both to you. What would you say is the key lesson that we can learn from other communities?
Ash, you want to go first?
Sure. I think infighting is a massive problem. I've seen it time and time again in the animal rights space. And I think just kind of getting ahead of that, realizing that some people just want to stir up drama and controversy and divide people. And I'm not going to stand for that, at least in my community, if I can avoid it. We want to nip that in the bud as soon as possible. We're up against so much already outside of our communities that we don't need to be tearing ourselves apart from the inside. That's what people who don't agree with our philosophy or ideas want to see. So let's not give them that. Let's agree to disagree on some things. And again, just kind of focus on what our goal is.
And Ash, you're either a very good ventriloquist or your camera has frozen. But we heard you nice and clearly, so don't worry about that. Amanda?
Yeah, well, I'm glad Ash ended on the word goals, because that's exactly where I wanted to take this. So I think, while things are still online or still kind of growing in an in-person context, we can do the best we can. It's going to be what it's going to be. But I think once, hopefully, we get to a point where we're moving towards goals, and I do hope antinatalism does that. And again, that's a very controversial thing to say, I realize, and I'm not suggesting that goal be extinction, not yet anyway. I do hope at some point antinatalism takes on shades of what American anthropologist David Aberle would call a reformative social movement, and one that does things like, perhaps this is just one idea, work towards like legal and financial protections for people without children. That is something that we could work towards it now, and perhaps achieve that. And I think, I think in order to do something like that, we would have to do, I think, something similar to what activists of marriage equality had to do. There was an incredibly huge division within that community, an incredible amount of infighting and aggression and all that, believe it or not. And it wasn't until Andrew Cuomo, believe it or not, basically, stuck it to them, saying, look, I will make this a feature of my career to try to achieve this, if you guys can just get your acts together and work together. And so in an effort to try to achieve a common goal, the constituent members of these different LGBT plus QIA groups had to sign what was called a memorandum of understanding to commit to a point to get the job done. And they did that, and they were able to, and hopefully it will never be taken away. So I don't expect us to ever come to a point where we all agree with one another. But I do hope that we get to a point where we believe in achieving goals enough that that something like that might be possible, and that we can actually start getting real things in the world done, because we absolutely have that potential, and we should.
Right. And one thing that has come up across the different questions, obviously the problems of infighting, the problems of not having shared goals, this kind of thing. And I do wonder if a potential solution could be small, like not quite localized in terms of geography, but small groups or small people who share particular aims with under the broad banner of antinatalism, that are maybe quite carefully moderated, or not even moderated, but have those shared goals, but still come under that antinatalist banner. And so long as there is like a generally healthy like overall kind of vibe in the antinatalist community, I could potentially see people who are maybe motivated towards one particular thing moving, in that direction without, needing to, as you're saying, Amanda, boil down to the lowest common denominator, which in antinatalism, I don't even know what that would be. I was trying to think of it there. In terms of a goal, I think there are generally like shared views in terms of recognizing the harms of coming into existence. But then in terms of factoring that into a goal, I wonder if you could have a series of small, well-managed spaces within the antinatalist community that somehow don't fight with the other small spaces. I don't know if this is a pipe dream, but what are your thoughts on that?
I'll go real quick. I think that's kind of what we have now, and I think they become echo chambers. And I think that, there's a lot of antinatalist Facebook groups, like really a significant number of them, and most of them are dead, but yeah, they're highly territorialized. Everything in antinatalism is highly territorialized. So again, I just think that the real challenge is going to be hopefully a desire coming up to actually wanting to achieve something bigger than but I don't know. I don't know what that push is going to be. I don't know what that impetus is going to be, but I do hope we get there. Yeah. Sorry, Ash, go ahead.
You're good. I honestly don't really have much to add to that. I agree with what both of you said, and I just hope that this movement will continue to grow. It's cool to see some of the mainstream media and people who have a lot of followers mentioning it, like to know that we're such a small portion of the population, but it is, catching the attention of people. That's, I don't know, kind of exciting.
just on the note of infighting and getting along, how do we as a community address things that people would certainly disagree with, say like rampant misogyny or something like that, or like violent fantasies or threats within the community? And how do we deal with generally problematic behavior without broadening that to general disagreement, if that makes sense? How do we distinguish between the two, and who does the distinguishing? Just to give an example, like for example, I personally don't appreciate seeing hatred towards children within antinatalist spaces, but I can understand why some people might, for example, think that that might not cross the line as something that would be bannable from a group. So how do we regulate what we might see as toxic behavior without crossing the line into just trampling people's expression?
Yeah, I mean, this is really complicated. I mean, I think people should make active statements against those kinds of things that they find that they vehemently, no pun intended, disagree with. But I mean, it's, the hatred of children thing. I mean, one thing I want to point out is that, in addition to a fear problem, we also kind of have a moderation problem in antinatalism where, like I am a moderator of r/antinatalism, where a lot of the hatred for children and parents comes up, and it is a real problem. But how do you moderate 200,000 people? If you also plan on being a content producer and, maybe like wanting to eat and go outside sometimes. And, and so, people want these groups to be better. People want the community to be better, but they don't necessarily want to put in the time and the effort to do the work that's going to take. And as far as removing, elements of the community or members of the community that may espouse, truly egregious views and stuff. I mean, I think there's, Tehran was a Nazi. Arthur Schopenhauer actually did throw a woman down a flight of stairs. I brought that up a number of times to people, and people tell me, don't talk about that because you might hurt Schopenhauer. So, I mean, I think we got a lot of apologetics going on. I mean, and yes, yes, like many of my friends have said things that I don't agree with. So I think we need to just be really good at openly disagreeing with those things and calling them out. I mean, I think that's perfectly reasonable. But I also don't think you're going to get rid of that kind of stuff, unfortunately. But I also think normalizing, deterritorializing child-free and antinatalism so that more women can be a part of antinatalism, that's going to take care of some of this. Unfortunately, if you maintain that divide for the sake of, I don't know, academic antenatal purity, which I think is a big part that drives that, I don't think we're going to get anywhere to curing that. And as far as, a hatred of parents, I mean, it's really nice when we don't have to use words like breeders and everybody is very understanding and stuff. And I think we should do that as much as possible. But I also think we have to acknowledge that antinatalism is an expression sometimes for a lot of people of a kind of ancient, unexpressed, for the most part, rage. And like that hasn't had anywhere to go for a long time. And you just have to expect that people are going to be angry and that they're going to express that. And I don't know. I fully admit, I don't know exactly the best way to deal with that in a healthy manner, but I think that we can't be surprised by it because it's an inevitability, unfortunately. So go ahead, Ash, I'm sorry.
I think for me, I've had it a bit easier because I haven't had to manage really large groups of people. So for example, like our Stop Having Kids demos, it could be 2 of us to maybe 8 or 9 of us. And for us, like we're very much like, let people kind of do what they want, but stay true to our core message and values. Like we have a sign that says no hate for parents or kids. So our group needs to act that way. We're not saying, anything bad about kids or how much we hate kids or they're annoying or whatever. Like, let's try to keep it a little more positive. So yeah, I've had it a lot easier. I haven't had any conflict. I haven't really had anybody act out at any of my demos. We even have somebody who joins us who isn't antinatalist. She very much agrees that, we shouldn't be reproducing at the rate that we are, but she knows that when she comes to the demos, like the message is antinatalism and educating people on that. And she sticks true to that. So that's been really nice too. So yeah, I'm hoping it can continue this way, but yeah, it's kind of inevitable, especially in online spaces. And it's unfortunate because people from outside the community peek in and they see that, and then they want to act as if all antinatalists feel this way, and it kind of gives us a bad look. And yeah, hopefully more people will feel comfortable stating their stance and showing that no, like actually you can love kids and also be antinatalist and not want to have kids of your own. Or you can be someone who had kids and later realize so many things, just like eating animals. I did that for 25 years of my life. And then I came to these realizations and was like, wow, if I had known this, I wouldn't have done this. And it's the same for parents. So yeah, I think that just giving people some grace comes in very handy.
And that was, it's a really positive note to end on. I was just going to say that one of the things that I do think that can potentially help as a community is just by acting like a nice person. And we do all get it wrong. I certainly do go on the odd rant from behind my keyboard from time to time, but just a bit of kindness and compassion really goes a long way. Just wanted to thank you both so much, and a huge thank you to Shweta as well, who obviously dropped off earlier. Really hope everyone enjoyed this panel discussion. Please let us know if you'd like more kind of discussions in this format for future iterations of AAC. And we will join you. We'll be back in a few minutes for our final session of the conference with Magnus Vindy.